Hey again, everybody. It's David, Mike, and Greg, and we're here for the momentous 200th episode. Not really, it's supposed to be 201, but because David's back, it's the official 200th episode of the NearMemo, which we're very excited to bring to you. Brought to you, as always, by the Transparency Company. So check them out at askfortransparency.com. David is going to be talking about his recent trip to Europe and DMA issues, Digital Markets Act issues with Google in particular. Mike will be talking about some recent unusual communications from Google around support issues and bugs and problems with GBP. And I'm going to be talking about Bing's opportunity and the sort of evolving search UI and why I think chat is the future of search. So let's take it away.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Sorry to listeners and to you guys for not being available last week. I was unfortunately recovering from an illness that I picked up in Europe, so it was not my favorite week, but happy to be back in the office this week.
Did you have to pay a tariff when you came through customs for having that in your luggage?
He made it back before the tariffs.
I made it back before the tariffs were announced, so I was fortunate, yeah. But certainly that topic certainly came up at one of the conferences that I attended, which was it's called Thought Leaders for Competition. It was a group of lawyers on both sides of the sort of big tech antitrust, anti-competitive behavior debate. And one of the speakers, keynote speaker, in fact, was Thomas Cromler from the European Commission. I think his title is something like the head of unit for the competition sort of wing of the European Commission. And so he's one of the sort of main enforcement folks tasked with enforcing the Digital Markets Act. And so just coincidentally timed that the commission announced preliminary findings of noncompliance, specifically with respect to Article 6.5, which prohibits Google from self-preferencing its own products and services within search results. That announcement of preliminary announcement of noncompliance happened the day before the conference, so it was a good time to hear head of unit Cromler's perspective on kind of where the commission is. I asked him pointedly in the event, the current investigations, which these findings of preliminary noncompliance relate to, are specific to shopping, flights, and hotels. And I asked him, essentially, is there a perspective that they want to pursue sort of vertical by vertical investigations kind of moving forward indefinitely, or are they hoping for a more horizontal compliance solution to come from Google? And he indicated that they are hoping that there will be a more horizontal framework under which or within which Google can work across all of these various verticals. So that was certainly a very interesting conference to attend. I also attended and spoke at SMX Munich, which is a fantastic conference. I think it's the largest search conference in Europe. Now that the UK is no longer formally part of Europe and Brighton SEO can't be included in that categorization, but a really awesome conference put on by Sandra Finley and her team. It was a really professional event, great enthusiasm. And the surprising thing to me, however, in my session, which was largely talking about our research in Europe as it relates to consumer behavior with some of these DMA elements that Google, both that have been around long before the DMA, as well as that Google introduced as a result of the DMA. That presentation, I specifically asked folks, how many of you have heard of the DMA? How many of you are aware of Article 6.5, which prohibits self-preferencing? Very few hands went up. And in a room of maybe, 150 or so attendees, 10 hands might have gone up when I asked that question. Now, some of that could just be sort of typical German reservedness and not wanting to sort of engage publicly in a conference. But I think that's pretty indicative of sort of a lack of awareness broadly of how significant these changes might be for search marketers, and I think from our perspective, how beneficial they could be to traffic for our clients and for individual businesses and directories across the web. I think that the goal of the DMA, as stated by the European Commission, is to make the digital market more fair and contestable. And right now, Google's position as sort of the choke point for traffic from search, I think the commission is trying to sort of pierce that veil a little bit. And it could be a major, I think, positive change for websites of all sizes in Europe. And I think that message sort of hasn't resonated or hasn't made it out to the search marketing community in Europe, kind of based on my anecdotal sort of experience at SMX Munich.
So I have two question about AI and AI overviews and AI mode being inserted. I think it was Cromler somebody mentioned from Europe that it was a unit that should fall under DMA. Did that get discussed? How does that relate?
So I don't think it was Thomas Cromwell who discussed that. I think it was Thomas Hoepner, who's a lawyer himself.
Yes,
right.
On LinkedIn.
Yep. And so Thomas Hoepner's position, I believe, is that because these AI overviews are drawing on a proprietary index that Google has created, and that and competitors of Google don't have the same opportunity to receive an AI overview placement, right? It's not like Bing can compete for that. It's not like TripAdvisor, if they have an AI overview product in travel, it's not like they have any opportunity to rank in that same spot. And so I think that that's his position, is that it's a proprietary Google product that other sites don't have access to. And so that would fall under the DMA. I don't necessarily, frankly, I'm not a lawyer. Haven't done a close reading of the law to understand specifically what is defined as an online search engine versus online intermediation service, and whether AI mode or AI overviews fall under which of those two camps. But it does feel to me that the sort of prevailing logic of the self-preferencing court judgments as well as regulations is sort of like any unique box that is a Google box in the SERP.
It's closed.
That is not that is closed, not open to other parties, and doesn't directly refer traffic from a searcher to a website, that is a proprietary product and subject would fall under Article 6.5 of the DMA. So I think that that's sort of the prevailing logic. I don't know that that is something that the commission will absolutely hold. I think that this is probably a new thing that maybe needs to be more defined as part of the sort of subsequent revisions to the DMA that will probably come in the next 2 to 3 years. But right now, I think it's a little hard to say if AI overviews do definitively fall under Article 6.5.
The other question I have for you, sorry, Greg, is yesterday I shared with you an article about the new FTC commissioner who accused the DMA of being anti-American at some level. And attacks on America, and forced our companies into a process that didn't have due process. Like, very ironic that the Trump administration would be talking about due process, but it was a very forceful, and this follows on J.D. Vance's fairly forceful criticism of the DMA. What was there discussion at this legal conference about this sort of heavy-handed political sort of leveraging of our strength to force changes to the DMA?
I don't know that it was necessary that the legal conference anyway was that this conversation happened with that level of a political lens on it. I think it was more a question of, is this heavy-handed regulation or not? And is this regulation likely to foster more innovation and more competition? And so, and in particular, I think one of the themes at the legal conference was what are the tangible benefits to consumers of this regulation? And I think that that's actually a very dangerous focus to put this exclusively on consumer benefits, because I think a lot of the benefits of the DMA actually businesses will feel the benefit first, and that consumers will feel downstream benefits if more businesses can compete as a result of this regulation.
Yeah, when you say businesses, you mean online businesses, not necessarily.
I think offline businesses as well. I mean, I think specific to what we're concerned with in terms of Google showing its own business profiles at the top of SERPs, right now, businesses are behind the 8 ball, especially with all the bugs that you're going to talk about. Businesses are behind the 8 ball with respect to Google owning those business profiles and Google controlling the flow of users. And if Google is forced to no longer sort of be that intermediary, and is sending more clicks directly to offline business websites, I think that offline businesses stand a chance of significant benefits as an outcome of this law.
A couple of questions and, comments, really. The consumer focus has always been the centerpiece of U.S. antitrust law, and Lina Khan was trying to change that, because you can have a situation in which a monopolist like Google is doing things that actually yield a consumer benefit, but or don't necessarily raise prices in the short term, which has been the kind of myopic thinking, but in the long term degrade competition and ultimately harm consumers or harm consumer choice. And I could on the tariff issue. Excuse me. Zuckerberg is appealing directly to Trump to put pressure on Europe because they're going to get slammed with a big fine. And so we're going to see the DMA be swept up into this whole tariff discussion, because I think what Trump will probably do, even though his FTC is still is the antitrust agenda, seemingly what we're going to see Trump do is try and apply more pressure to Europe to weaken the penalties or otherwise dilute the DMA, and it will be up to Europe to maintain resolve in the face of that. pressure, but they're going to bring economic pressure on Europe to do that. And Zuckerberg is making that pitch directly because they've been doing all this sucking up to Trump, and here's the quid pro quo about that.
I'm sure it's not the first nor the last.
Right. And then in terms of AI overviews, I mean, I think an AI mode, obviously they didn't exist when the DMA was formulated, but the logic, as you say, of the rationale behind it should extend. I mean, that's a good law, is that you can sort of by analogy say, well, falls within it or doesn't fall within it. I mean,
well, just one note about AI is that Kahn and Cantor both pointed out that they feared that Google and Facebook and Apple to some extent and Amazon would leverage their current monopolies to gain unfair advantages in AI. And I think, as we pointed out last week, we see that happening in Google search.
Yeah, for sure. But what the DOJ's position is now, as of their amended proposed final judgment that they just submitted within the last handful of weeks to the court in DC, is that they want to prevent Google from using, as I read it, I may be incorrect, they want to prevent Google from using AI to maintain its search monopoly, when what you're saying is correct. It's the opposite. They should be blocking Google from using its search monopoly to establish a dominant position in this new field of AI. But I don't think that that's the emphasis. That was part of the original formulation when
that's why I used names, not departments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I just want to say one sort of addendum, which I think is sort of relevant here. I think that the commission, Thomas Cromwell did not say this directly, but sort of just the vibe of his comments, I would say that the commission is not eager to see a reversion to 10 blue links. And so I think that they're sensitive to what would be a degradation of the consumer experience in Google. And
which is not Google's defense.
That's Google's defense. And I think that Google ran a test of 10 blue links in Germany, Belgium, and the Czech Republic or something like that in hotels in November that was very poorly received by consumers and very poorly received by hotel suppliers, essentially hotel brands and individual hotels. And I think that Google is using that possibility as, a little bit of an overblown threat. I think if Google does indeed decide to revert to 10 blue links across these sort of locally relevant categories, I think they stand a substantial chance of driving people even faster into ChatGPT
100%.
or other alternatives.
100%.
And so I don't have any sway one way or another, but I personally would not be too cowed by that threat of a reversion to 10 blue links if indeed Google does end up pursuing that, because I think it's going to really hurt it's one of the most obvious things that would drive a consumer to actually try a new local search engine. And so from that standpoint, I think that would actually be a very successful implementation of the DMA and not in Google's interest to pursue.
Although AI organized results in theory that we saw in bars and cocktail lounges, and we're still seeing, obviously uses, where
those are all first party products though.
Yeah. Exactly, right. Every third thing, but that theory is not covered currently by the discussion, right? So that would be allowed under the current discussion.
I don't think that's true, because what they're featuring there are Google business profiles.
Right, but has there been any
in those modules?
Right, but there's been no discussion about Google business profiles up to this point.
To the extent that the hotel finder features hotel business profiles, I think that it has elevated to the level of discussion. So, all right, anyway, speaking of Google business profiles, on to the problems with GBP.
There we go.
Mike.
So we've been obviously following the suspension and appeal process quite closely. I've been charting out daily posts in the forum, and Google published a notification, I guess it was probably 2 weeks ago now, that they were inadvertently had a bug and were causing too many re-verifications and suspensions. I'm adding the suspensions to that. Same double-sided, same coin. They actually publicized this bug. They then actually posted that appeals of suspensions were dramatically delayed. Side note on that, what we're seeing amongst people who are doing them right now is if you file an appeal to suspension that's totally clean, it gets approved right away. So it's sort of FIFO on the easy ones and LIFO on all the other ones. So it's still, if you're not in 110% compliance, you're still going to be 4 weeks. But if you're in 110% compliance, you will get it right away. So they had a notice about that. And then last week they had a notice that somehow they've let old reviews back in that had been previously eliminated by their review algorithm. Again, another public statement, and they recommended that you go back through the appeal process to get rid of them. Now, I don't understand what a business who got 50 of them is supposed to do, but the word that when I asked was go back through the appeal process. So, but what's fascinating to me is that 3 bugs, aggressive algorithms, we don't know what they really were or are, had resulted in 3 public statements. And as we've talked about here before, Google is very, very hesitant to make public statements until shit gets really bad. Clearly the shit got really bad, and they didn't get out front on the appeals one, because we were talking about that in February, and it was end of March before they solved it, but they did ultimately come up with a statement. And it's just fascinating to me that some people contend that I've talked to that this is a new, more transparent Google. I doubt it. I think obviously I've been here long enough to know that any transparency is either illusory or very temporal, kind of like the Northern Lights, they go twinkling and then they're gone.
And like your test laptop repair business, it should be named.
Yes, but that one lasted for a long time. That was God. I
it
had
was
that
illusory, but not temporal. Yeah, exactly.
That's true. I had that fake listing for 15 years before it got nuked because I did a very aggressive experiment with it. But that's neither here nor there. It's just fascinating to me that they've gotten. We'll see if this is a trend or just a short-term effect of them shorthanding whether this is a temporary effect of them shorthanding support so that they're going to have a lot of problems. Because what's been happening is, as they shifted people over to solve the appeals issue, all the other things are now being delayed dramatically, like review appeals. Those sorts of things are now gone into deep delay. And so things that used to take 2 days are now taking 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks across the board. So clearly they took cross-trained employees and moved them over to solve the appeal thing. So then they're going to have to move all the appeal people back. I don't know. So I'm just curious your thoughts on why Google communicated all of a sudden.
I think that the drumbeat of problems just elevated to, it's their standard PR playbook, where if enough people complain loudly enough and it starts getting out into more and more and more sources, that they have to respond. And I think that that's the only thing. I agree. Nothing feels different about this. It's just that the problems are all now so significant that they couldn't just sit back and say nothing because it didn't follow their PR playbook. So.
Well, the question is this the new normal, right? Is Google going to are there going to be delays and delays and delays for everything? Or is this some temporary situation that will revert or improve and go back to something more, shorter time frames?
Well, the fact that they've cut back staffing in GBP and pushed into AI more aggressively means, one, I think that there's a shortage of staff to watch for these things and to double check, do quality control. 2, that compute power is being diverted. So from where I sit, these problems are only going to be more frequent and more likely, be both for personnel and computing reasons. So we'll see.
So what's the advice to marketers then? Do fewer changes? Don't touch your profile?
Bulk, which is where some of these problems was. David can tell you bulk has been buggy for years, hasn't been touched or fixed or worked on. It continues to be buggy. They continue to suspend listings within bulk that they previously approved. It's a shit show. So I would stay away from bulk altogether if you have a choice. If you can,
unless you don't have a choice.
Well, you have a choice. If you go, once you get approved, you can go through somebody like Bird Eye or Reputation or one of those companies to maintain your listing, Uberall, etc. So I think that's a more reliable way to maintain your listing, although that has its own problems, because if you go in...
Those companies were all subject to the same verification
problem, right?
Bug 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Well, right. But I think other than ours, and photos, and you should be continuing to ask for reviews. That doesn't change. You should be continuing to upload photos. You should make sure your hours are accurate. But other than that, I don't think you should be changing much. You shouldn't be changing categories. You shouldn't be changing business names, the kinds of phone numbers, the kinds of addresses, the things that are going to trigger the likely suspension. And if you are going to do that, plan well ahead with a good citation campaign, with updates to your website, so that you've got 6 weeks ahead of it so that Google has had time to digest this information. So if there's nobody to look at it, the algorithms are going to see that this is your new address, or this is your new phone number, or this is your new business name. And then you might be able to flow through this process more quickly. But do it by the book. It's just the book you have to know what the book is. And Google they've been better about publicizing what the rules are when you've failed. They haven't been ever very good about publicizing what the rules are before you try to sort of do gray or black stuff with them. So
I wouldn't even call a lot of these things gray or black, though. I mean, I think adding a new category for a business type that should have been optimized for that category 5 or 6 years ago, that is not gray or black.
No, that's true. Yeah. But naming, which Google has long embraced abuses of the naming protocol. Now, in talking to a number of people doing appeals, your name has to match across multiple website Google leases. So they are looking at that in terms of appeals. It may not be a reason to get suspended, but it may be a reason that you don't get unsuspended.
Well, so name spam was a tactic that was working for improved rankings.
Well, and it's still working for the
guys
still working through already. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And if you do it right, you really make this your new name. It's not just law firm. It's law firm specializing in sexual and workplace harassment. If that's your new name, that's your new name. Nothing.
Law firm specializing in workplace harassment near me.
There you go.
Welcome to the law firm specializing in workplace harassment near me. How may I help you? Although nobody actually answers the phone anymore. It's all machine driven IVR.
All right.
Anyway,
that's all I got.
Okay, all right. So, David, you referenced the risk to Google of reverting to 10 blue links and sending people potentially to ChatGPT or alternative. And I want to talk about kind of the UI and Bing's opportunity and just sort of general sort of user preferences. So, long time ago, before AI really sort of took off, we were talking about the problems of the Google SERP UI and its clutter and the cognitive load and everything that you needed to deal with it. And, I think that Google's AI overviews, AI mode is a little bit different, but Google's AI overviews have added to that and created more clutter and created more problems. And I think that, years ago, many years ago now, in the early 2000s, there was, I think I wrote about this, companies like Autonomy and Fast Search and Transfer that were enterprise search companies were selling their product on the basis that Google had conditioned users to expect the simplicity of the search box, right? Search was the universal user interface, and they had to match that in the simplicity of the UX. And that was their selling pitch. And it was a pretty compelling pitch, and it was really largely true. And I think now we're at a moment where that's changing, where search, at least the SERP, not the search box necessarily, but the SERP is no longer serving people in the same way that it was. And I think that, users have expressed, and Mike, you shared an article in our Slack channel about conversational interfaces and their value, or when they work and when they don't work. But I think people now are being conditioned by ChatGPT and others to a degree to expect a new kind of experience, putting aside the SERP, a conversational interface where you can either speak to it or you can enter text in a more natural way and follow up and have a conversation with the results. And I think that is going to be the new standard over time. Now, we can talk about RAG and hallucination and all these other issues about sort of generating results and whether Google's local graph and product graph, knowledge graph are better than ChatGPT. But I think in terms of the UX and UI, we are now entering a new period, and Google is clearly adapting to that, with their innovations. I also think Bing, which hasn't really made, maybe I'm wrong about this, they haven't really made any headway. They were the first to sort of come out with ChatGPT and say, hey, here's this totally new search experience. And Google, everybody made a big deal about it and hasn't resulted in any share increases. Maybe it's infinitesimal for Bing. Bing is sort of like, can't catch a break, right? And so I think they've sort of slowly made some more changes in the UI. With Copilot, they're sort of gradually rebranding Bing Chat as Copilot. And I think that there is really an opportunity for them. They don't have the same dependence on search ad revenue, and they don't have the same kind of legacy that Google does that they have to protect. And they can do something much more radical with search, and they really need to do that. They really need to push deeper into this sort of hybrid chat search experience. They have the places graph, and they have a lot of the same, they have an index, in a way that others don't. And they have an opportunity to do something more radical and to sort of create the new sort of hybrid search chat experience that I think would get them usage, especially if they abandon Bing. I think Bing is dead as a brand, basically. So I'm going to write something about that in the article. That's a sort of a many tentacled kind of point. But I think we are genuinely transitioning to a new UX. How that nets out between search and chat remains to be seen. But I think Bing they have to do something like this, otherwise they're just going to be irrelevant. They're just going to be completely irrelevant.
I want to qualify. Sorry, Mike.
Go ahead, David.
I want to qualify your statement, though. I agree with you that for the majority of my searches, I prefer just the style of answer from ChatGPT or from Copilot to a traditional Google search result. I will grant you that point enthusiastically. However, I do think that there are specific verticals where that is still a suboptimal interface, and local is actually one of those verticals. I think we see it in our user research that photos and reviews and a map are like essential to helping consumers make a decision faster in a way that a list of businesses, which is typically what you get in these responses today, is not it. Now, I don't think that ChatGPT or Bing or anybody else is done or Perplexity is done innovating with how they answer local queries, but I do think that I guess what I'm saying is broadly, I think that there may be specific result modes that are better than the current conversational interface.
I totally agree with you.
What's on offer today?
I totally agree with you. I think that there are different outputs that are appropriate to different use cases, right? Or different contexts. And I think that that's completely right. But I don't think that's precluded by a chat style example. I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot right now, this is sort of an adjacent point, is the role of agents in the future. So Deep Research is an agent, Perplexity Shopping is an agent, OpenAI Operator is an agent, and Amazon released this thing called Nova, which is a kind of a platform, but they did Nova Act, which is their agent, and they have a shopping agent now, Interests. And Nova Act, two of the examples, one of them was Alexa Plus, powered by this Nova Act thing, and the other one was, I think, just a straight up search, where they showed two local examples at their recent unveiling. One of them was a search for an appliance repair person using Thumbtack, which I guess was tapping into this. And the other one was like apartment search, where one of the criteria was near a train station or something like that, and sort by distance from the train station. And what these things, which are really still very crude, would be to give users the ability to lay out a list of requirements. This is sort of the call. What's it called, Mike? The Google thing, call, the RFP.
Call forming, maps.
Yeah,
call forming,
right. So that's an agent also. So you would be able to lay out a list of requirements. I want a product that looks like this. I need a vacation that looks like this. I want a service provider that can do these things at my house. And then have the machine really do a lot of the heavy lifting for you and produce a set of results at the end that you could then contact or choose from, And so I think that that's also a very interesting scenario that's coming into view and will have a major impact on how people find and discover and interact with businesses in the future.
Do either of you think that, one of Microsoft's advantages, their huge install base of applications?
Totally. The business install base and, having a chatbot that's built into all of these awful Teams implementations at all of these enterprise companies, like that is such a no-brainer from a market penetration.
Well, they're doing a version of that. They're trying to do a version of that. Yeah.
And is that, combined, so Bing is just a corollary to that, not the primary focus. I did look up Bing usage on the desktop, and it has doubled since 2023 on the desktop. I have no idea about mobile.
Well, that's significant. That's significant. Right. I think though that the Bing brand, it's hard to change your brand, but the Bing brand is pretty tired and Copilot is a better brand for this new generation of experiences. I think the chat interface doesn't work in a lot of situations. And what Google's doing with AI mode, in fact, with local, is it doesn't work. You if you ask for businesses in a certain category and hit the AI mode button, you get a list that may or may not include useful information like reviews, and you don't get images really. But all that can change, and I expect all that to change. And the problem for Google, and we've talked about this before, is if Google really goes for it and makes AI mode a great experience, or Gemini for that matter, right? If they were to really push into those scenarios, those surfaces, and make those the best they could be, they would aggressively cannibalize Google search.
Yeah.
And that's
so Greg, I'm going to put back to you a question you gave to me. What should marketers do about all this?
Well, if you listen to Rand, who says, and there are a couple others. I mean, it's ironic that Rand is the one who's, the mouthpiece for this. But if you listen to him, it's like, all of this AI hype is really overblown because it's a tiny, tiny, tiny shred of traffic that Google. Joy is sort of, making this point too. Tiny shred of what Google is delivering to marketers, and so essentially you can defer your focus on AI as an SEO or as a marketer.
I personally think that that's not good advice. I think
agree.
that this is going to change faster than Rand and Joy realize, I think. And I totally agree with them that right now, Google is still the 8,000-pound gorilla. They are like, you should be monitoring traffic and visibility in ChatGPT and Copilot and other places. But Google is going to still be delivering 90% of your traffic. I don't see that changing anytime soon. But to not get into these LLMs that are, in some cases 6 months behind where the live internet is, to ignore that as a significant channel in 2 years seems like it's now is the time to start investing in that. And there's a lot of things. Fabrice Cannell from Microsoft, I won't even use the B word, given that it's a dead brand. Fabrice Cannell has been very helpful recently in 2 presentations, one at SMX Munich that I was at, another one in Barbados or something that was a Microsoft event just yesterday. Very helpful in helping search marketers identify tactical things to do for better visibility in Microsoft's LLM universe. One of them being schema beyond just the basic schema that we're using today for Google search results, which are largely trying to game the UI of Google. And then number 2, Index Now, which is basically a fast lane into the RAG index that Microsoft is using to double check its LLM sort of answers.
And Microsoft is important for ChatGPT. I mean, to some degree, ChatGPT is relying on them. I don't know whether Bing Places are powering the local results entirely, but Microsoft is feeding a certain amount of data to ChatGPT, and so it makes it worth it to engage with Microsoft for that reason. But people should be testing and learning while they have the luxury of doing that. I mean, people shouldn't say, "Oh, well, ChatGPT is just a tiny slice of traffic, so I'm going to basically ignore it." They should be saying, "I've got a long runway or a relatively long runway to learn about this before it really kicks in a major way." I mean, every conversation I have anecdotally with civilians or people who work in the industry says the same thing. I'm using fill in the blank, LLM, and I'm using Google much, much less.
Yep. I think that's a really big point. That just because your ChatGPT traffic is 0.5% of Google, that's a drop in the bucket of ChatGPT usage, right? And I think that's
doesn't everybody have to make a Wallace and Gromit image of themselves?
That's right.
I thought that was de rigueur
in Studio Ghibli.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that was an insane. That's worth a discussion on its own, which we don't have time for. That was an insane phenomenon. They released this, as a product launch, no marketing. They said, here we got this upgraded image thing, and people just went crazy.
Simultaneously with the release of Gemini 2.5, which is one of the most powerful AI models on the market, and they blew Google's marketing out of the water. They totally, basically, ChatGPT became the dominant story, and Gemini 2.5 was sort of in the backwaters of the news.
Yeah.
There's multiple reasons.
Circle back to our original discussion, because I know we got to wrap up here soon.
Yeah.
I think that this is exactly, sort of what regulators and the courts should be concerned about, is that Google probably sees itself in a very bad position vis-a-vis Gemini versus ChatGPT and Copilot, and they will absolutely try to leverage their dominant position in the current search environment to keep users using Gemini. And I think that is absolutely a consideration that regulators and courts should be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, they're using every single surface available to promote Gemini. Every single one, I mean,
including spamming us on Google Workspace.
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, it's like, how many Gmails do I have to send where it's like, help me rewrite this, or it's like, no, get the fuck out of here. I mean, apologize for my language. So
if you want, I can bleep it out and put a different word in now.
If you sure, use your discretion.
It's up to me. I'm leaving it in, dude.
We'll have the director's cut 6 months from now. That'll include it.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So should we adjourn for the week?
I think so.
All right.
Thanks again to the Transparency Company for sponsoring. Definitely appreciate their involvement this last quarter or so. And yeah, great to be back with you guys. And again, apologies to you and to listeners for a pretty tough week last week.
Yeah, well, glad it's over.